So if anyone doesn't know yet, I am Reverend Bonnie, the community spiritual leader here at the center. And it is always my pleasure to start off the month. And this month we are focusing on our true nature. Our true nature. And so my question to start off with is, does knowing our true nature really make a difference? Is that important? And if it is, then why? Why might it be important? And if I know my own true nature, do I then know the true nature of every single one of you and every other person in the world? Is it the same nature, or do we have different natures? And if our nature is the same, what is the significance of that? What is the implication of that? When I first discovered religious science up in the Albuquerque Center for Spiritual Living, Reverend Patrick would often say, God is all there is, and the congregation would respond by saying, and the rest we made up. And I have thought about that for many years. It used to actually bother me. If God is all there is, how can there be a rest that we made up that isn't of God? Is that really what that means? If God is all there is, and another thing we say is there is no spot that God is not. Have you heard that in the New Thought movement? There is no spot that God is not. Well, if that's true, how can there be a rest that we made up? And if everything is God expressing, God is moving in and through all things, then what can we make things with? What can we make it up with if it's not God itself? Many of you have heard Larry speak, and every time he speaks, I think he reminds us that there are things that we might not like, and there are feelings that we might not enjoy. But if it's all God, it's all God. And so, if that's true, if we are God expressing, and if God is expressing in and through all of us, what does that say then about our true nature? If everything is God, what is that saying about our true nature? And then one of my favorite questions comes out of the movie The Sound of Music. It's when Maria has taught all the kids how to sing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and little Greta says, but does it really mean anything? And that line goes through my head a lot. Does it really mean anything? All of this that we say, the fact that we are God expressing, that God is in and through all things, does it really mean anything? Ernest Holmes says in the very beginning of the Science of Mind textbook, if you read just those first few chapters, I'm pulling a lot of these readings out of there, he wrote that Jesus summed up his whole philosophy in a simple statement. It is done unto you as you believe. The great teacher looked so deeply into nature, and he capitalized the word nature, that she, and he capitalized the word she, revealed her fundamental simplicity to him. That believe and that as symbolize heaven and hell. And so we suffer, not because suffering is imposed upon us, but because we are ignorant of our true nature. And so if we understand what Holmes is saying, understanding our true nature can alleviate suffering. It can alleviate our suffering. It can alleviate suffering in the world. So to me, there's one reason or one meaning behind understanding our true nature. And so I continued to read on, and I contemplated more of Ernest Holmes' words. Spiritual wisdom says that God manifests through everything and is incarnated in all of us. That all is divinity and nature herself is the body of God. All of us receive some light, and this light is always the same light. There is one nature diffused through all of nature, one God incarnated in all people. And so again, as I contemplated that, I started thinking about all the things that show up in nature and that show up in us. I started thinking about all the ways that God can express physically, emotionally, and spiritually in the world and in through us. And again, I ask, but does it really mean anything? And if it does, what does that mean? What is that saying to us? And as I started contemplating this more, I had the vision of a large storeroom, the hugest storeroom you can imagine, bigger than any Costco or Sam's Club that you can imagine. A big storeroom filled with everything imaginable that you might need to create anything. Art supplies, building supplies, everything that's in nature, cells and atoms, all of that. And in addition, shelves and shelves of bottles of emotions, every possible feeling and emotion you could ever have or choose to experience. So can you see this room just filled with every possible thing? And all of that, when we walk into that storeroom, is free for us to use as we create and as we develop our life. But further on in the Science of Mind text, Ernest Holmes says, and he capitalizes this entire sentence, but what we draw from it, we must draw through the channel of our own minds. A unity must be established, and a conscious connection must be made. The Spirit can give us only what we can take. It imparts of itself only as we partake of its nature. And further on he says, it has been said that we can know God only insofar as we can become God. And then he says, this is a far-reaching thought and should be carefully scrutinized. It isn't to be taken literally, it's to be taken figuratively. For we cannot really become God, but we can and do partake of the divine nature. And the universal does personify itself through us in varying degrees according to our receptivity of it. And so I started to realize that we can walk in there, we can see this huge storeroom, and it's up to us to figure out what it is we want to take from that divine nature in order to create what it is we want to experience. And so I started to think, well, our divine nature then is to choose, to go into that storeroom and choose what it is that we want to express or experience. So I kept reading, and so one more from further on in the textbook, Ernest Holmes says, in studying the order of our evolution, of humans' evolution, it seems certain that it was necessary from the time that we were brought to a point of self-choice. There's the key. We were brought to a point of self-choice, that we be left alone to discover our true nature. This is true of all natural laws. They have always existed, but only when we understand them can they be used. In this way, life, and he capitalizes life, in this way, life is waiting upon our discovery of natural law, our discovery of ourselves, and our discovery of our relationship with the whole. Life is waiting for us to figure out how all this stuff works. It's already there. It's already ready for us. And so it was interesting for me to think about the fact that as I get to know myself better, I understand spirit better. As I understand spirit, I understand myself, and it starts to look like a circle. We're going round and round, and yet I do believe that's how it is that we're evolving in our understanding of how our true nature works and what our true nature is. Now, if it was that simple, which I think it is, that there's a storeroom, we walk in, we look at all this grandness that spirit is laying out there before us, we collect what it is we want, and we create what we want, and life is grand. So why is it then that sometimes we don't experience life as being so grand? Why is it, if it's that simple, that we sometimes feel like we're not having as much fun as we'd like to in this experience? Well, the other thing that Ernest Holmes talks about, he calls race consciousness or race thought. And as I contemplated this idea of God is all there is, but the rest we made up, I started thinking about the race consciousness. And maybe that's what Reverend Patrick was referring to, because Ernest Holmes refers to race consciousness or race thought as being erroneous. So again, I started thinking, how can we have a part of God that we have created with God's stuff be erroneous? What would make that true? Well, again, think about the storehouse. I pictured this big storehouse, and all around it are lots of different doors going in to the storehouse, into what is available to us. And each door has its own foyer, its own lobby, its own place where people hang out and live and experience life. And in each lobby, we get born through the parents that are already living there. And in that lobby, some people have gone into the storehouse and said, "Ooh, this looks really cool," and taken it back to the lobby and said, "This is wonderful, this is God, this is of God." And everybody in the lobby starts following that was brought in from the storehouse into the little lobby. And they decorate the lobby the way they want. They develop their own language. They develop their own clothing styles. I don't know what lobby I was in. I have my own. And they develop their own societies, ways of living, what's considered appropriate and what isn't. And in that lobby, life starts to evolve. Now, everything in there is from what people went into the storehouse to get and create with. So it's created with God, of God, as God, but it becomes race consciousness because it is limited. It's limited by what is in that little lobby. And that is the place that I believe it becomes erroneous, is when we think that that lobby is the storehouse. And it's not. It's what was created with everything from that storehouse, but it's one piece of it. So again, we start to get kind of connected to that. We get attached to what's in our own little lobby. We think, of course, that it's the best and what's exactly right. And if all we did was go into the storehouse, get what we needed, come in and create our little lobby and live in there, then we would be happy too, right? Wouldn't that be simple and easy? But what's happened, I think, is that between each one of these little lobbies, we've started to have windows. And we can see into the other ones. And when we get brave enough to venture into the storehouse, there are those big aisles, and we can see over some of the counters, and we see that those people from that one are choosing stuff off of a shelf way over there. Why would they want that in their lobby, when what we have right next to our door is the best? And we start to see what they're creating with over here, and we start to think, well, that's not right. What we get when we go through our door into the storehouse is what's right. And we start to see and compare, and again, that's where I think what we call erroneous and race consciousness gets developed. Because we're assuming that just what's in our little space is all that's correct, as opposed to seeing that every single lobby was also created with the stuff from the storehouse, with the God stuff that's out there. So if we're born into this lobby and we see someone maybe who's born in Russia or Mexico or the Middle East, we might feel like, hey, that doesn't look right. And then what happens even in our own country, if we're born on the East Coast compared to the West Coast, the Midwest, the Southwest. And then I realized even within a lobby, each generation starts to create their own little lobby that has its own doorway, because of course what our parents did wasn't as good as what we're doing, and our kids just really don't know what's going on. So it continues to happen. Lobbies within lobbies where we feel safe, and the doorway still is open to that storeroom, but we get comfortable with what we have created in our, what Holmes calls race consciousness. And so I want us to note that we all, everyone, has access to the storeroom. The door is always open, and everything in there is free. So how do we get in there? What do we do in order to get in there? Well, I think that one of the things that we do when we go in there, or to get ourselves in there, is through meditation. It opens us up. It allows us to be aware of and open to new things, to different things. So meditation can work, prayer can work, but also reading and interacting with other people helps. One of the things that I wanted to draw on again is from Greg Bear's concepts. We've been talking about this for a couple weeks now. He wrote about real love, and a second book he wrote is Real Love for Wise Men and Women, the truth about sharing real love. And one of the things he says in here, because remember we're at choice, and he also talks about the law of choice. He says, a wise person does not become truthful, loved, loving, happy, and unafraid overnight. Remember what it was like to take your first swing at a baseball, or drive a car with a clutch for the first time, or say your first sentence in a foreign language. We learn to do all these things through practice, and that's how we learn to see, accept, and love other people. The more we practice loving, the better we do it. And further on, he says, you learn to love people only by interacting with them. And because learning involves making mistakes, we have to be willing to be gentle with ourselves as we might make mistakes. As we venture into that storehouse, as we choose to love unconditionally as opposed to with conditions, it takes practice. And it takes practice with each other. One of the things I learned from my mother, and you know I love her and I miss her dearly, and yet I watched her really challenged with this teaching and this belief. She had taught me from a very young age that we are made in God's image and likeness, that we are God expressing in the world. But when she went out in the world, she didn't like a lot of the people she saw. And she had a hard time working with people that were different than her. She didn't like the music that we had up at the center in Albuquerque. It was jazz. We had a jazz band before the service. That was not the kind of music that should be in church. So she was challenged with that very teaching that she had taught me from day one. So we can believe that everything is of God and created by God. The challenge is in practicing how we live that way, how it is we see that in each person as we interact with them. And so as we do that, and we take ourselves into that space through meditation, through prayer, through reading, through interacting with people who are different than us, and through going through the storeroom and exploring some of those other lobbies, seeing what's in there, seeing what other things God has created or has been created with God's stuff, and opening ourselves to seeing some of those things that are different. Ernest Holmes wrote something that I think is really beautiful. So again, I'm going to use his words. This is further in to the text. And he's talking about the new order of thought. We now call it new thought. In the new order of thought, we are likely to fall into as great an error as in the old thought, unless we go much deeper than thinking of God as merely principle. God is more than law or principle. God is the infinite spirit, the limitless conscious life of the universe, the one infinite person within whom all people live, the one indivisible whole. And then he wrote a little poem. Holy, 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 inner presence great and mighty, inner light that shines divinely, inner life that lives completely, inner joy that smiles serenely, inner peace that flows so deeply, inner calm, untroubled, happy, inner love that gives so freely, inner truth that never fails me, inner power that holds so securely, inner eye that sees so clearly, inner ear that hears him always, inner voice that speaks supremely, inner good that binds me to thee. Holy, 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 Lord God within me. So there's a whole list of things that you can find in that storehouse that I believe are part of our true nature. The presence, light, life, joy, peace, calm, love, truth, power, eyes that see clearly, the ears that hear that direction always, the voice that speaks supremely, our good. All of that is within that storehouse. And so I ask again, but does it really mean anything? What do we do? How do we create it to bring about meaning in our life? And that's where I think what Greg Bear said, the importance of interacting with others, the importance of practicing is there. I believe that as we understand our true nature, it develops meaning as we practice it. And as we do what Beth read in the reading, act. Move it into action. Affirming our conscious thought is what he said, ACT, affirming our conscious thought. We act. We act upon what we recognize is our true nature. And as we do that, we always have to remember that that lobby has a lot of influence in our life, and that's okay. That's okay as long as we realize that what's in there isn't the whole picture, that there's so much more out there that we can draw on, that we can use, that we can bring into our lives. And as we loosen our hold on that stuff that's in the lobby, as we loosen that and remember that every other lobby is made of God's stuff, that it's all good, and that we have choices. As we choose to go into the storehouse and not just take what people bring us themselves, but we go in and we look around, we see what works for us, and we bring that back to wherever we choose to be and create with that. What a huge difference I believe that's going to make in regard to a world that works for everyone. Because every month, not only are we talking about our little theme, little, I'm just saying sort of as a joke, our true nature isn't so little, but we're looking at it in regard to our true nature in a world that works for everyone. And so again, I want to share with you, this is from last month's. This month snuck up on me. I kept saying this was this month's, but now we're in September. So this is August's this year, Science of Mind. And Reverend Dr. David Bruner, I think, sums it up really well. It is important for me to remember that there is only one life. There are not two lives, a constructive life and a destructive life. Think about that. Sometimes we say, oh, well, he's living a destructive life, oh, and this one's very constructive. There is one life. Not a constructive life and a destructive life, but one life. Therefore, the one life and my life are the same life. Life's voice and my voice are the same voice. Life's word and my word are the same word. Right now, I speak my word, inviting into expression a world that works for everyone. Such a world already exists. I remove anything in me that would reject or deny this world. Think about that lobby, what needs to be removed. I believe in such a way that I am in alignment with that world. I do not try to make that world happen. Rather, through this prayerful moment, I make that world welcome. It's up to me. So think about welcoming in that world that works for everyone. Today, my focus has been kind of on the broad picture of what our true nature is. And I think ultimately our true nature is to choose how we want to be. We have all these different ways of expressing and being in the world, and we are at choice. In a couple of weeks, I'll be speaking again, and I'm going to explore what happens when we choose joy, our true nature as joy. And it'll be interesting to see what the other speakers choose to focus on in regard to our true nature throughout this month. Right now, I want to ask you to think about what might be within your lobby, what might be there that's preventing you from accessing that storehouse, that's preventing you from getting all of the good that's yours. As you think about that, I'm going to ask the practitioners to please surround this room. Stand up and surround this room with your love. It's so exciting to have so many here. Remember, these folks are here to pray with you, for you, to help you see your lobby from a different perspective and help you to enter that storehouse. So as we ask, what is our true nature and what does it really mean? I believe it has great meaning. I believe it informs how it is that I can move and choose to move in this world. So what do you think? Let's go within. So as we enter that storehouse that is within us, Every aspect, every possibility, every potentiality is part of what we are. We recognize that wholeness. We recognize within the wholeness the great diversity of ways to express, whether it be physically, spiritually, emotionally, whether we're creating things outside of ourselves, whether we're creating our own inner environment. We just breathe into that space, seeing the vastness of our opportunities and our choices. And so we allow to surface into our mind something that might need to move aside, that we're complete with, and something new that we can take back with us from that storehouse. What do you see that you've always wanted to experience, to express, to have? It's yours. Grab hold and take that back with you. How grateful we are that it really is this easy. How grateful we are that as we get to know our true self and our true nature, we access it more freely. How grateful we are for this amazing experience that we call life, and that it has waited for us to recognize our true nature. And so it is.